Hey, man, I think you picked up on something that I actually want to get into. And for those of you watching live, drop a question. If I think it's good, I'm going to pitch it to Bronson. I'm checking the chat. I appreciate you being here. Alex Grinch agrees with you in that he doesn't think that any part of their defense is something to write home about. Matter of fact, I talked about this on the Young and Drum podcast, but I think it's interesting to bring it up again when he was asked, "Yo, man, how much progress have you made in 15 practices?" And Grinch says, "I don't see a fast defense yet. I don't see a brand of football that would put us anywhere close. Certainly not an elite defense, but I wouldn't even make a claim to be in the top half in the country." And I'm going, throw your hammer, sir. Like, this dude does not give out compliments to his defense. And I wonder, what would it even look like for him to have a top half of football defense? And would we be able to tell him that, hey, man, you guys are ranked, let's say, 41st in the country in total defense? Do you think this is the kind of guy, from his quotes, and I understand you don't know him personally, but from what you've heard, the big difference between him and Mike would be what?
Um, that's a good question. I think that remains to be seen. I hope that he comes in and preaches speed and swarm the football and wrap up and tackle and track your guys in coverage, which is not anything that I don't think any defensive coordinator should not be teaching. Full disclosure, but no, I think to get back to your point, if he's able to get them to the point, and I would be shocked if that happened this year.
Mm,
If they're in the 30s and as far as ranking a total defense,
right.
they're going to win the national championship. Um, Now that's 30s. We can be in the 30s. There's a lot that goes into that. We're in the Big 12. It's an offense-heavy conference. We don't have the strongest personnel. The personalities aren't. The argument's going to be, or the excuse will be that these aren't his guys, right? These aren't his guys. He didn't recruit them. They don't fit the system. Well, these guys are talented enough to be at OU. So there's a standard there that I think um, should at least be considered. That you're here for a reason. If people didn't believe that you could play at this level, you probably wouldn't be here. And I think at a certain point you got to just rise to the occasion. And it's not easy to do. It's not easy to play good defense week in and week out, especially in the Big 12. I think we've seen that. And a lot of times you see these Big 12 offenses will go in the bowl game and they actually fare a little bit better on both sides of the ball because they're playing a little bit different style. They slow the game down a little bit. They're not having to compete as many plays every game. But I hope that he's able to come in and preach that aggressive mentality, which obviously he has. That obviously seeps over into into every area of his life. He's very intense,
Right.
which is great to see. Which I think kind of reminds me a little bit about Brett Venables, back in the day.
Oh, man.
Just I mean, intense handshakes, intense highs in the hallway, intense, dinner. We were eating intense. I mean, everything was just hyper focused, and he was locked in on everything he was doing. So, I hope that he can bring some of that, and I'm nothing negative against Mike. I
Right.
played with Mike, and he's a great guy, and really did a lot of things positive. I think that people forget about from time to time. So I have nothing but respect for Mike, and really just hoping that this guy can step in and be impactful like he's done in other places.
No, and all the Mike negativity is on this side of the conversation. That's clear. But I think you hit on two things there. Venables has a story that Rufus had told me about Venables, Rufus Alexander, and that dude used to like drop Red Bull into his Gatorade and shake it up before practice, and then drain the Gatorade. And I'm going, yo. And then
That
that does
wouldn't
that
be
fit?
surprising.
Okay, all right. So
No, I mean, like you got a coach out there that's just, I mean, the veins are popping out of his neck and his forehead, and and that's not to say that he's not a player coach, so to speak. I mean, obviously he does a great job of getting guys bought in and getting great recruits, and I've actually talked to him several times since I've been gone. He left after my second year, I guess.
right,
Um, but yeah, he's just a whole different level of intensity. That's it's not I'm mad, so I'm fired up. It's just constant with him. He's always fired up. He's always bringing that high energy, which I think can, some guys feed off that, some guys don't. But um, I think if you're a defensive guy and your coach is out there and he's he's bleeding and he's sweating just like you are. I mean, it's gonna at least motivate you a little bit to play hard for him. But I'm hoping the new guy can bring some of that same intensity, and he also has some experience kind of being in that similar scenario as far as being on the other side of a team that's got a very powerful offense and knowing how to manage that side of the game. The defense is out there sometimes a little bit more than you'd hope.
Score too fast guy.
Right.
No, I think you make a good point there. But I did want to point this out. Because we're talking about total defense and rankings, and you're saying if they're inside the top 30, they're winning a national championship. And a lot of that's predicated on the offense being as good as it was, not just the defense closing the gap. But in the Big 12, for giggles, we're talking about Iowa State being ranked 33, TCU being ranked 24th. And those are your two top defense. And I think Texas is inside like at 60 or whatnot. And this is last year. This is January 21st, 2019, NCAA total defense statistics. And depending on who you talk to, total defense is kind of a junk stat. And Bill Connolly's S&P Plus is a big deal. But it is attainable and achievable. Maybe not this year. But I've said for a long time, since TCU got into this conference, they proved you can play defense in this conference. Now, their problem is being able to score points. And when they had Trayvon Boykin and Sonny Cumbia out there, they didn't really have that issue. And we were talking about Baylor and TCU and whether or not they should have been in the college football playoff, and their schedules got the better of them. But I refuse to believe that you cannot play defense in this conference with the way that it's structured, if for no other reason than Matt Campbell came in there with John Heacock and said to people, we're going to play defense, we're going to keep everything in front of us, and we're going to force you to dump down passes, Will Grier. And they were able to get what they needed, right? In Texas, they play 5 and 6 DBs. But the difference is those 5 and 6 DBs are the kind of guys that Grinch wants to recruit. They're tall, they're rangy, they're fast, and they know how to tackle. As a matter of fact, to your point about the whole attitude of the team and swarming to the football, his quote that I love, that needs to be on a t-shirt, is if you made a solo tackle, you're lucky. He does not want anybody making solo tackles. He wants somebody getting there first to tackle, or somebody getting their second to strip, or one or the other. I think we're gonna get upset about that because we're gonna see a lot of lawnmower plays and a lot of Hakeem Butlering all over the place where he's just dragging dudes to the end zone. But it's a good thing to remember and to bring up that this is not a conference where it's impossible to play defense. And Alex Grinch seems to have a strategy in his head for how to combat these air raid concepts, and even that Ohio State, Texas basketball on grass system that they run down at Texas. So I'm interested to see how that works defensively, because I know that the guys have gotten a lot smaller. And I also wondered, would you rather play a guy at defensive tackle who weighs 295, 280, who can move? Or would you rather play a guy at defensive tackle who's around 320, 315, and is just going to try to bull rush you, but also probably stronger than you? What do you think?
Oh, if I had to pick, I would rather play a taller, more athletic guy than a shorter, stockier guy. If you're me, for example, I'm 6'4", 6'5", playing against somebody that's 6'1", and is, like you said, very strong. And even if they may still only be 295 or 300. I think back to Lewis Nix from Notre Dame.
Oh, good pick. Yeah.
My senior year, he was listed at 6'1". He was probably 5'11". We're talking 350, 360.
Yeah, he's a big boy.
And those guys, you can't really move them. So it's kind of just like running into the wall, and you just try to stick to them. But they're a little bit easier typically to deal with when it comes to pass protection type situation. So it kind of depends on the game plan. But guys like him, guys like Kerry Hyder from Texas Tech,
right.
Who's still in the NFL, I believe. But that's all. And maybe that's personal preference. But for me, those short, squatty guys, and they're all athletic. I think that's kind of a usually if you're playing defensive tackle at a Division I level, you're going to be pretty athletic for the most part. But
so you're the kind of guy that thinks that I think you make a point here. That's what I'm saying. But everybody's an athlete at this level. Why do we say athletic?
Yeah, that's kind of, it's like, whoa, that guy's really fast. It's like, well, he runs a 4.39. This guy runs a 4.22. and he
They're
runs a
both really fast.
4.41. Like you're talking about a snap of a finger difference, and sometimes that does make a difference. But
Right.
that guy that runs the 4.42 is really, I mean, he's the fastest 1% of people in the world,
Right.
as opposed to the guy who runs the 4.32, who's the fastest, 0.05%. I mean, it's insane the margins we're talking about. But I mean, if you run a 4.2, if you're 275 and you run a 4.8, and guess what? You're really fast.
What if
and
you're 4.8 and 303?
Yeah, I mean, Lane Johnson runs a 4.76 or whatever it was at 316.
Right.
That's more impressive to me than a 4.3. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
It's insane, and people don't necessarily correlate that, but yeah, I mean, everybody for the most part is going to be athletic. Guys that played the position I played, mostly offensive guard, maybe on the lower end of that scale. But at the end of the day, we can move a little bit too, or we wouldn't be out there doing what we do. But yeah, I mean, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. You watch film all week, and you determine, when we're in this particular scenario, they have a tendency to do this, and you study your opponent and make sure that you know them hopefully as well as they know themselves, and try to compensate for some of those athletic deficiencies that might be there when you're talking about O-line versus defensive line.